Hi people, it's me, Anja. I pronounce all she and her, and welcome back to my channel for a new video. Historical fiction is one of my favorite genres to read, and I've realized last year that the majority of historical fiction books that I read that feature people of color tend to feature Black or Asian people, and I've made videos in the past focusing on my favorite Black historical fiction books or my favorite Asian historical fiction books, so today's video focuses on my favorite Latin American main characters instead to feature more underrated book recommendations. So anyway, with that said, I hope this video helps diversify your bookshelf. I hope this video serves as a reminder to always keep telling the history of many marginalized people and how it intertwines to their current struggles in modern day. If that makes any sense, I think that historical fiction is so incredibly important because history is so important to keep telling and keeping alive, because the history of the past bleeds into the history of the present, which will bleed into the history of the future. But anyway, with that said, I think that this video is so important, so I hope that you enjoy it. So with that said, the first book on this list is called Cuba in My Pocket. This story is a middle-grade historical fiction following a young Cuban main character who must immigrate to the United States in 1961. I think it's so good and so fantastic. First of all, I love stories about immigrants, about moving to a new country or a new place, because I love the trope of fish out of water. It's definitely one of my favorite tropes ever. Second of all, I loved the historical fiction setting. I knew nothing about this setting prior to reading it, which means that I had no expectations about the ending or the plot or anything like that, because I didn't know what actually happened historically. Second of all, I loved the characters and the family and the plot and everything that happened in this story. I love this book so much. I think it's so fantastic and it's so emotional and it's so well done. I think it's so excellent and brilliant, and I love the pacing and the writing and everything about it. I think this book is absolutely so underrated and it deserves so much more hype. So anyway, with that said, I would definitely highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Rosa by Any Other Name. This story is a YA historical fiction retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1955 following a Mexican-American main character passing as white. I thought this book was so excellent and so well done. First of all, again, I loved how educational and informational this story was, as well as being so emotional. I was so emotionally connected and invested to these characters and the romance and the plot and everything. This book is so good and it's so fantastic. When I was younger and I was learning about the civil rights movement in school, I thought naively that it only impacted Black and white people, and I forgot that obviously it impacted other races too. Or maybe I just wasn't taught that in school, that obviously other races would have been impacted since they're people of color too. But anyway, this book was so good and so awesome. I loved the family dynamics and the characters and the plot and everything about it. I think this book is absolutely so fantastic and it's so excellent and it deserves so much more hype. So anyway, with that said, I would definitely highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Silenced Voices. This story is a YA historical fiction graphic novel that alternates between 2013 and 1982 in Guatemala. I thought the story was so good and so well done. First of all, I loved the illustrations so much because they were so vivid and so good. Second of all, I love the story and the plot and the family dynamics and everything. When I was younger, I realized that because I grew up in America, I was taught history through a very American lens. So when I became an adult, I realized that there were so many historical events that happened that I never learned about, either because A, America wasn't really involved, or B, America was portrayed very poorly. So the Guatemalan genocide was definitely one of those events, since it was practically caused by things that the United States endorsed. You know what I mean? Which makes me wonder how the Palestinian genocide is going to be taught centuries from now. You know what I mean? Anyway, all that to say, this book was so amazing and it's so well done. I was so emotionally connected to the characters and the plot and the family dynamics and the two timelines and everything. I think this book is so fantastic and it's so good and it deserves so much more attention. So anyway, with that said, I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called A Seed in the Sun. This story is a middle-grade historical fiction following a young Mexican-American main character during the 1965 Delano grape strike, and it's written in verse. I love this book so much, and I think it's so excellent because, first of all, I love free verse stories in general, but second of all, I love stories that really talk about, like, oppressed voices and the courage and the bravery it takes to, like, stand up for yourself, especially against, like, bigger, powerful forces, such as the government or, like, an oppressive religion or something like that. I thought this book was so incredible and so well done. I loved the writing and the pacing and the characters and the family dynamics and everything. I think this book is so fantastic and it's so good, and it deserves so much more hype. I think that books like these are so incredibly important and relevant. Like, one of the reasons as to why I love historical fiction so much is because so many events that happened in the past parallel to the present. And I love how historical fiction truly humanizes these characters, because the ways that I was taught about history in school is like we were taught to memorize dates and we learned about historical figures, and I feel like we forgot to humanize the ordinary people that were also living through these terrible times alongside all these people that became known as, like, celebrities, for lack of a better word. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I thought this book was so fantastic and it was so good. So anyway, with that said, I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. The last book on this list, and definitely not the least, is called Self-Made Boys. This story is a YA historical fiction retelling of The Great Gatsby, reimagining Nick as Mexican-American and transgender. Jay is also transgender, and Jordan and Daisy are both lesbians, and Daisy is currently passing as white. I thought this book was so fantastic and it was so good. I loved the plot and the characters and the romance and the setting and the queerness and everything about it. I think this book is fantastic and it's so good. And I love a good solid T for T romance. Like, I loved the queerness of it all. I love reading queer historical fiction so much because it truly helps normalize queerness, especially considering how some people think that being queer is a new trend. Like, what are you talking about? You think it's a new trend? Where have you been? Clearly not anywhere on Earth. Anyway, I think that queer stories are so important because they normalize queerness, especially in a society with rampant homophobia and heteronormativity. But anyway, I digress. I think this book is so good and so well done. I love the characters and the plot and the found family and everything. I think this book is fantastic. So anyway, with that said, I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. So in conclusion, I know that many of you read only for fun and for entertainment, but I urge you to read also for education. I think that reading, especially in America, is one of the easiest, most accessible hobbies. Like, if you have an address and a phone number, you can get a library card. Get one. It's so important. Invest in your local library. Start reading more. And start reading more genres that really expand your worldview, that have characters that don't look like you, etc., etc. I hope that this video urges you to continue reading, to continue to stay informed, to learn new things, and to normalize changing your opinion on something because you learned a new thing. So anyway, in conclusion, all that to say, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the strawberry emoji if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you're new, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!